Hello, and welcome to another World of UX podcast. I am your host, Darren Hood. Thanks for taking the time to join us on today. A special welcome, as always, to those of you who are joining us for the first time. We are just beginning a brand new series where we're talking about what we're calling the harsh realities of UX maturity. And in this series, I want to spend some time helping people to understand what UX maturity is, helping people to understand how important it is, helping people to understand how to recognize some of the pros, some of the cons, so to speak, some of the ups and downs, some of the challenges, some of the requirements. What is UX maturity really all about? And what's happening today in the world of UX with regard to UX maturity? How do people feel about it? How are people treating it? This is an extremely serious topic. It's something that this is 30 years for me in UX, and I've seen UX maturity the way that it's publicized. I've seen the way that it was publicized initially. I've seen the way that we were taught about UX maturity. I've seen the way that we have operated in it and regarded it, revered it, basically. And then you started to see this ebb and flow where different UX maturity models started to be circulated. People would embrace some more so than others. And then you got to the point where in recent years, some people are saying that UX maturity is not important at all. And then they'll explain to us reasons why they say it's not important. And when you consider where we are, when you consider what UX maturity really is, that is extremely dangerous for everybody, including the people who are trying to shoot UX maturity down. So last week, I gave you a really very rough high-level presentation with regard to what UX maturity is, how I approach it, how I teach it, because a lot of us, when those of us that were in UX, when back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when somebody would bring up the topic of UX maturity, we would always go back to the model presented by Nielsen Norman. It was a great model in that it helped us to form strategies. It helped us to have a North Star. It helped us to have a sense of accountability where we were always trying to, and everybody who was in UX in those days was trying to do things the right way. There was no misinformation. We weren't fighting one another. There was a lot of great things that were going on. And it helped us to try to make sure that we would examine ourselves based on that model to see where we were, identify what we could do to get better. And we were not neurotic. We were not afraid to be criticized by anybody. We weren't afraid to be judged. Judge me, please, just be accurate about it. You should be willing to be judged. You just want people to be accurate. That's when it's constructive. It's when criticism is not constructive that it's a problem. But at any rate, I don't get on that soapbox. It was so important early on, and it helped us to ascribe to and achieve different heights. Today, not the case. And so we talked about also the fact that we were always taught that UX maturity was an organizational thing, and we only looked at it from an organizational standpoint. I spent some time last week talking about other places where UX maturity can be applied, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time there today. In the interest of time, I'll challenge people to go back and listen to that, and I'm going to be revisiting that because I'm going to take my sweet time. This is actually a redo. I had back late last year, I believe it was in Q4 last year, I talked about this topic, and I talked about the consequences basically of not managing UX maturity. And I didn't think I did a great job at it. I think if somebody's not familiar with the topic, it would help them. But this topic deserves much more attention. It deserves more time. It deserves more coverage. And so that's what we're doing. So this is a redo. We're doing that old topic, but we're doing it in a completely different way. And we want to touch on as many aspects of this topic as we can. In this second part today, we're going to build on that little mini foundation that we did last week, and I'm going to present what I'm going to refer to as the UX Maturity Challenge. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that how I mentioned people are challenging and saying that we don't need UX maturity today. One person said, and some of you will find this interesting, one person who said that we don't need to pay attention to UX maturity today, one of the reasons they said that, they said nobody wants to, two things. Actually, I just remember one other one. Person said that nobody wants to be judged for their level of maturity. Well, that's childish. I'm going to tell you that now. That's childish. Very, very childish. It's unrealistic. Thought of another one. It's very unrealistic. It does not allow us a means of accountability. It takes away the North Star that UX maturity provided us in those earlier days when we were so successful, and you didn't have problems with companies accepting UX maturity when or accepting UX teams, I should say, when UX maturity was something that was put out there for everybody to review and to aim for, and you had more cohesion from company to company, more alignment from company to company, more parallelism from company to company with regard to UX, because we were looking at, thinking about the same things and examining ourselves based on a lot of the same standards. When you take away UX maturity and you basically render it as nothing, when you strip it of its value proposition, now you've got anarchy. And that's what's going on today and why we suffer so much in the discipline now, because this one standard that we did have, people are pulling it down. So they say, hey, nobody wants to be judged by that. We should be. We should be. And one of the biggest aspects of that criticism was that the issue, and I mentioned it, I alluded to it at least a few moments ago, nobody wants to be judged for their maturity. For the record, maturity is real, not just for UX, but for everything. And speaking of that, let's dive into that a little bit. Let's make that our jumping off point. And for those, slight review, I mentioned 5 different types of UX maturity. It's not just organizational UX maturity anymore, folks. We have discipline-wide UX maturity. We're going to spend weeks where we're going to be focusing on each one of these individually. Not today. I just want to mention these so people have this slight recap. We have personal UX maturity. So I have a UX maturity level. You have a UX maturity level. Your teammates have a UX maturity level. And then there's team UX maturity. Everybody's team has a collective UX maturity. Again, and the same benefits that we get from the way that we looked at UX maturity before, it applies to each one of these. You have academia-based or educational UX maturity that applies to educational systems, no matter what that education system is. If it's a boot camp, there's an educational UX maturity accountability there. If it's a university, there's educational UX maturity levels there. If it's a MOOC, a massively open online course like your Udemy's of the world and your edX's of the world, your different, the different venues out there, Maven, educational UX maturity applies there also. And so there are different aspects of UX maturity, different places where UX maturity applies. And so there's that accountability and there's benefits if we align ourselves with it, if we pay attention to it, if we honor it, it will take us to higher heights and deeper depths as we go forth in UX. But if you blow it off, then there are consequences. That's what that other episode was about. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to UX maturity and making sure we're aligning ourselves with it and coming to a point of understanding it. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of being judged. Don't be afraid of somebody evaluating you. Our whole life revolves around this. But as mentioned a few moments ago, this issue of maturity, think about it for a moment. This is from Merriam-Webster. The definition of maturity: the quality of state of being mature. I know it's another one of those funny definitions where the word that's there is actually something that it almost is almost like a bit confusing in that the definition repeats the word or a form of the word in the sense that you sort of lack clarity. when you see that. But we understand what it is. And matter of fact, for those that sort of miss, I think those types of definitions are funny sometimes when we see them. It's really talking about development. So when we think about UX maturity, let's think about development. And when you think about development, we all develop. We used to be an infant, then we became a toddler, and then we ran off to kindergarten, and then we just develop, we develop, we develop. We grow, we grow emotionally, we grow physically, we grow mentally, we grow intellectually. And so there's all these different aspects of life maturity. Then you have aspects of professional maturity. You have the aspects of educational maturity, all on a personal level. And then you have maturity that applies to your family, maturity that applies to you and your siblings, maturity that applies to you and your sports teams or whatever your organization is. We cannot escape maturity. UX cannot escape maturity. This is important. We cannot run from this. We cannot shoot this down. We can't castigate it. We can't ignore it. Maturity is real. And the more we embrace it, again, I keep saying this, the better off we are. So let's remember what maturity really is. And let's think about that as we think about UX maturity today. Now, as it pertains to, let's look at regular maturity. And you can parallel this with UX maturity as I go, but consider these traits of immaturity, if you will. Impulsive behavior. That's an aspect of immaturity in life and in UX. Recklessness. That's an act of immaturity in life and regarding UX. Overconfidence. Arrogance. Gullibility. Stubbornness. Being naive. Neurotic. Overreactive. Hyper emotional. Failure to be grounded in your thoughts and managing yourself and taking things too harshly, well beyond the way they were delivered. Hypersensitive, being entitled, act like people owe you something. Nobody owes you anything. Being void of empathy, something that's at the core of who we are, what we do. Being void of empathy is a sign of immaturity in life, and it's a sign of immaturity when it comes to UX maturity. And unaccountability. Folks, these are all traits of immaturity in life, and they're traits of immaturity as it pertains to how we grow and how we are progressing when it comes to user experience. And not just the practitioners, but our teams, our stakeholders. I told the story last week how when I began to broaden my mindset about UX maturity, I started assigning it to teams. I started assigning it to projects. I started assigning it to stakeholders. And that's when, man, the light bulb really came on to see how broadly this can be applied. We need to have this mindset in order to thrive today. So let's move on to what I mentioned. We're going to move on to the UX Maturity Challenge. And the UX Maturity Challenge, in this, I'm going to present a series of questions. I'll elaborate on some, maybe more than others, but these are questions that I'm going to ask you. I want you to ask yourself. This is when we're really going to be like singularly introspective. We want to look at ourselves. We want a little bit of an EQ exercise in that we're going to take, as much as we can, an honest and an objective look at ourselves with regard to the questions I'm going to present, because they will tell you where you are when it comes to personal UX maturity. We're focusing there today. So, number one, how do you define UX? Yes, how you define user experience speaks to where you are when it comes to UX maturity. And the more developed you are, the more grounded, the more solid, the more trustworthy that definition is going to be. Now, if you're one of those people who thinks that UX is a mindset, that's not mature. And it's reflective of that list of immaturity elements that I just showed a moment ago. Those of you who are listening by way of podcast only, like looking at video. You didn't see the list, but you did hear it. And so if your definition of UX is reflective of naivety, there's a problem. If your definition of UX is not empathetic, there's a problem. If it's too narrow, there's a problem. If it facilitates people being overly confident and is not realistic, then it's not mature. So you see how this works? So how do you define UX today? Take that, go back. Again, I'm not going to speak to some of these a lot today. I want you to challenge yourself and to start looking at these things very, very honestly and from a very broad perspective. Question number 2. Do you believe the barrier of entry to UX or for UX, should it be low so that anybody can come in with no qualifications, no particular skills, no particular mindsets? Or should it be high? Should there be a set of standards that causes a person or calls for a person to have to develop certain skill sets or mindsets before they begin to venture in this direction? Like with other disciplines, I'm tipping my hand here a little bit, and you already know how I feel about this. I don't even have to talk about these to a great extent. You know where I'm going to come from. And the barrier of entry to anything that is a scientific discipline requires a higher barrier of entry than others. If some people, and I've said this before, as I say it again, we're not flipping burgers over here. And for those of you who may have never heard me say that before, working in UX is differently. I mean, let me back up. Can anybody do the job? Yes and no. If you're interested in UX and you have a genuine desire to be in the field, welcome. I welcome you on your journey. I wish you all the best. But if you're coming over here because you're just chasing a paycheck, if you're coming over here because what you heard or you heard it's easy, you don't think that it takes anything, that's not a realistic approach. It is an immature approach. And for people who enter UX with an immature mindset, those people are on the fast track to extreme UX maturity and being bound by the different pitfalls associated with opting into a lower level of maturity. That's a problem. So the barrier of entry, it doesn't have to be high to the point where it is exclusionary, but it needs to be high enough so that it calls that person to a level of accountability and holds that person to a set of standards. That means that you need to make sure that you're always trying to get better, because when you come into UX, you are opting in to a lifetime, I should say, of continuous learning. We're always learning. We never arrive. If you drink the Kool-Aid that some people present and sell out there, that you can learn UX in a week, that you can learn UX in 6 months, I've heard somebody say that you can learn everything about UX in a weekend. They are presenting an extremely low barrier of entry that really only appeals to people that are embracing that unrealistic and immature mindset, which again is going to pretty much basically doom that person to continuously drinking that type of Kool-Aid and never really being in a position where they're committed to increasing their acumen and upping their game. That is when you buy into immaturity, you're going to be immature, and you're always going to reject those provocative elements to make you be better at your craft. You don't want to be that person today. Next one. How important do you think UX fundamentals are? I have met people, I have heard people, I have seen people where they try to say these days that UX fundamentals are no longer important. I'm about to do a talk for this for the folks at the upcoming Geeko conference next week. And if you listen to this later, you'll find that talk out there. We'll end up sharing that talk on this show where we talk about the importance of UX fundamentals at large. But in short, fundamentals are a foundational element. If you're going to erect a building, then you plan to have that building last for a long period of time, you need to have a solid foundation. Likewise, from a metaphorical perspective, if you want to have a long, fruitful, and a strong career in UX, you need to have a strong sense of fundamentals. You're not one of those people who thinks that everybody can do it. Therefore, you just come in here and you just do it. And those are the people the ones that churn out the screens and that's all they do. Those are the people who never learn about the strategic element. Those are the people who never come to the understanding that UX is actually a leadership role, no matter what your position is and what your title is. UX is a leadership function. And so you need leadership chops in order to function over here. And fundamentals helps you to get that strong foundational perspective in place. And it facilitates excellence in everything that you do if you embrace them. If you're one of those people that think that fundamentals are outdated, if you're one of those people that think that we don't need to know about those things, and by the way, when I say fundamentals, I'm talking about heuristics, usability, information architecture, all the different aspects of UX research, interaction design. You learn about interface design, but you only design interfaces as they reflect the principles of interaction design, because for every interface, there's going to be an interaction design principle that's put into place throughout that interface. So these are the fundamentals of user experience. And so you have to be grounded in them to be successful in everything. So keep that in mind today. So how important you think UX fundamentals are, that actually speaks to where you are. Let me pause for the cause here too. If your answers to these questions are not favorable and some of the things I'm saying, you feel like you're really being called out, or as I said earlier, you're judging me. I am, because that's my job. And I am because I care about you. And I know that in order to be excellent, you have to subject yourself to this type of scrutiny. Matter of fact, you should be doing it yourself. Do it to yourself. I need to be better at heuristics. That could be the result you come at. I need to be better at information architecture. Good. When you recognize where you need to improve, you can be about the business of making that improvement. You can be better. I need to learn more about psychological principles. I need to learn more about interaction design principles. I need to learn more about different aspects, different methods of UX research and when to use them. I need to be better at the analysis of data and the synthesis of said data. I need to be better at designing research. Recognize where you need to improve. Don't be afraid to come to the realization that you may fall short, that you need to improve in a given area. There's nothing wrong with that. There's places I need to improve in AI. I accept that. I'm fine by that. And I'm going to continue to improve for the rest of my career. And everything that I know how to do, I'm going to get better at that too. So I want to make sure people understand that. We're not calling people out for the sake of putting people out. We're calling out these things so that people will accept the challenge, the UX maturity challenge, and get better. That's it. That's it. More power to you. Get better. But if you are blowing these things off and you're clicking the thumbs down on YouTube and you're angry, because people see my content, and they get angry sometimes. You can get angry all you want. What I said is still there and it's still waiting for you. And I have talked to people who were angry about something they heard me say, only to 6 months, a year, 2, 3 years down the line, come to the realization that what I said was dead on accurate. And then they embrace it and they got better for it. And they have come back and told me, you don't have to wait 6 months. You don't have to wait a year. You don't have to wait 2, 3, 4 years to come to the realization. You can exercise some emotional intelligence and recognize it now, not be afraid. Don't take what I'm saying personally and go forward, and we can celebrate together. How about that? Okay, on to the next one after that little commercial. Yes, you will. Do you believe specializations are an absolute need, and why? Now, somebody, before they heard that question, they were happy about what I was saying. They were excited about what I was saying, and somebody's jaw just dropped and they got angry. Same thing applies here. For the record, prior to 2011, there were practically zero specializations. There were definitely zero specializations in 2005, 2006. And if you worked in UX, you did all the things. Say it with me. All the things. You did everything. You did design, you did research. And sometimes now I've specialized. over the course of my career. But when I was a dedicated researcher, I was a better researcher because of what I knew about design. And when I focused mostly on design, I was a better designer because of what I knew about research. So this specialization thing, it's not sustainable. Just so you're aware, I've talked to people about this, and people, no, Darren, you got to get on board with this. No, you weren't there, most likely in 2005. I was. You weren't there in 1997. I was. You weren't there in 2009, 2010. Many of the people who have that mindset, I was. And so I know that we did everything and it was sustainable. And when people started to talk about specializations, part of what they did was they lowered the bar of entry. They had to, because now we've got to fill 5 positions instead of 1. And for those, one of the reasons it's not sustainable is that now the company has to pay 5 salaries instead of 1. For that reason alone, this is not sustainable. And for the record, companies are starting to pivot back to the generalist, hiring somebody who can do research and design. That's what companies are doing now, just so you know. And so you can prepare for it. If you are a dedicated designer and you don't do research, or you're a dedicated researcher and you don't do design, you should have, I should say, you should dedicate time to starting to learn more about any area that you consider to be a weakness in UX today. That's going to make you a better practitioner overall. It's going to make you more valuable. It's going to make you more marketable. And when you come across a company who's looking for a generalist because they don't have the money approved to pay somebody to pay a researcher and a designer and this other, you can be the person who's a better fit. So how's that for a proposition for you today? So, but if you believe that a specialization is absolute, it's highly likely that you have not been in UX beyond a certain date. And so you don't understand, you can't empathize with the hiring company. How's that for a different perspective? I can. I've seen it. I know it. And companies are starting to move back in that direction. You do have to be able to empathize with the company that you work for in order to see what their needs are and how to meet their needs. And you're in UX, you should be great at empathizing. And the more mature you are, the better you can empathize with whoever. Can't you? Starting to make sense? You get it? So, do you believe specializations are an absolute need or not? And why? That and why should go along with anything. When you feel a particular way, you should be able to explain why. And you should be able to be open to a counterpoint at any given time. I am. I mean, feel free. Let me know what you think about it. But those of you who've only been in UX, I see a lot of these people, I encounter these people who've been in UX for the proverbial 5 minutes, not a literal 5 minutes, but there are people I know who've been in UX literally for 2 months who want to stand toe to toe. Remember that list from earlier about immaturity, that overconfidence? If you've only been in UX for 2 months and you come across somebody who's been in UX for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, why are you so loud and boisterous? I've come across that. I have friends who have children, 5-year-old children, who feel really strongly about something that they have no validation for whatsoever. And you just sit there and you laugh. And so all you can do when you see this is laugh. The problem is that people keep giving these people the microphone, so to speak. They keep empowering these people to speak as if they know what they're talking about. And they're actually, they are enabling arrogance. They're enabling people who are addicted to a Dunning-Kruger mindset. And that's the crime against the discipline. So let's be careful of that today. That is an act of immaturity in and of itself. Matter of fact, enabling, that's an act of immaturity, even when it comes to UX today. It is the enemy of UX maturity when you enable people who really should not be enabled. So be careful of that today. Here's one. Oh, I guess we're saving some of the best and the most challenging for last here. Are you afraid of losing your job to AI? You see people posting about this all the time. And the people who are most afraid of losing their job to AI are usually either the people who have not been in UX very long, so they don't know. They don't really know what they're up against. And all they know is that AI is being hyped to the nth degree. That's all they know. Well, don't be afraid of it. Be like Dr. Nick, who will show you side by side what you do when you're skilled, when you've built your acumen, which you should be committed to instead of wanting somebody to hand you a job for having done nothing. And then he shows you what AI does, and he does a phenomenal comparison to show you that if you really build your skill the way that you should, you will actually be one of those people who will really outperform. And then AI then becomes a tool and not a replacement. And that's what AI is. It's a tool. It's not here to replace us. It's here to accentuate. And anytime a UX tool comes along, or a tool we can use for UX comes along, all it does is help us do what we do better or faster, but it's not here to replace us. So don't be afraid. If you're afraid, that just means you need to get better. That's all. That's all it means. So you can stop shaking in your boots. You can go put your boots back on. And that's what UX maturity does for you. The more mature you are, the higher your personal UX maturity is, the less afraid you are. And so now you can see one of the benefits of UX maturity. Here's one age-old challenge. This one probably should have been presented earlier, but that's okay. Should UXers be able to code? And some people will feel one way or another with this one. Sneak peek, quick thought. Coding is not a part of the UX discipline. It's not something we need to be able to do. When you can do it, it helps you to interact with, to engage with, to converse with the people that you work with who are doing the code. It helps you to understand a little bit more about what they're doing, but it is not an absolute. UX work is not inclusive of. Matter of fact, that work is done by a different persona altogether. If you apply, anybody out there who applies personas to different types of UX work, it's not in our wheelhouse. It is not. It simply isn't. Now, if you can, I've coded before. I've done HTML. I've done CSS. People don't know that. I've done CSS. I used to edit JavaScript and edit PHP. Can't write it from scratch, but I could do it. ActionScript. There's a blast from the past with Macromedia Flash. I could do ActionScript. I could write some of it and I could edit it, but never was it a part of UX. It was part of the development side of some of the things I did because I ran my own little agency on the side. So, there's another surprise. Some people didn't know that. So, but so as a person who used to do it, I'm telling you, and that it's not an absolute need. And when I worked at big agencies, and I worked at the largest digital agency in the world at one time, one of the things that was consistent across all the agencies, and I worked at 4 agencies, I believe it was 3 or 4 agencies in my lifetime. All of them were large, and some of them had multiple agencies under one roof. And the consistent thing that I always saw was that everybody stayed in their lanes, and the UX people did UX work, and the developers did development work and engineering work, and that was it. We did not cross over. There's a lot of people who work at startups where people have to wear a lot of hats, and the further down you go in the hierarchy, if you will, in the food cycle, if you will, the food chain, if you will, of UX operation and business operation, companies that the closer you get to a startup, the more likely you are to wear multiple hats, the more likely you are for somebody to want you to code, just so you know. So a lot of people who never worked at Digitas, they never worked at MRM, they never worked at Wonderman Digital, they never worked at Ogilvy. These people don't realize that when you get in a large place like that, you end up staying in your lane, and it makes everything more efficient when you do it that way. Now, when you're in a startup, yeah, it's beneficial for everybody to be able to do it. That doesn't mean that applies to everybody. And that's the thing that people don't get when they have so much experience in the startups and places like that. They don't get it. So that's your experience. Great. Don't say this is my experience. I'm telling you facts. This is not my experience. This is facts. So people who work at these places, can't believe all, just the list goes on and on and on. People stay in their lanes. So do you need to be able to code to do UX work? Nope, you don't. You don't. It's something that will help you. And it's funny because if based on the mindset people have that you need to be able to learn how to code so you can empathize with them, do you realize how many other disciplines we engage with? Do you need to know how to do their job to? No, you don't. So let's stop putting an unnecessary burden. UX consists of at least 250 methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables. And we've got enough to do to keep our saw sharp, if you will, in dealing with those things than to start learning about everybody else's job. We don't need to do that. We need to respect them. We need to learn about them as much as we can as we interact with them. Matter of fact, you want to know how you bridge that gap? Emotional intelligence. The more emotionally intelligent you are, the better equipped you are to work with other people and empathize with them as they do their job. You don't need to know the ins and outs of their jobs to engage with them. So let's bring everybody back down to earth with that one. Should UX be democratized? This is something that comes up a lot. A lot of people embrace democratization. And two things I want to point out here. Number one, the way people use the term democratize is not based on what it was initially trying to convey. Democratization for research, for example, was not about other people doing research. It was about other people being involved in the aspect of the not the analysis, but the synthesis. When the group comes together to decide what we're going to do because of what the data says, that's where democratization was meant to come into play. Somebody heard that word, took it literally, and then they started allowing other people to do the research. And as soon as people who are not specialists in this, people who focus on this, people who were trained to do this, start doing it, the quality, whoop, it goes down. And that's what has happened in UX since democratization. The way that I just explained it became a thing. So, and then people want to get involved, especially with something like Figma Make today. And now you've got, again, people who are not trained because they think that design is about making things pretty. They don't understand that it's a science. It's art and science. But basically speaking, it's a science for the most part. It is a science. And the scientist needs to do the design, not somebody willy-nilly. And those people are usually, ooh, I want to design. That's usually what they're doing. And so they don't realize that is reeking of forthcoming error, destruction, and catastrophe. When you let unskilled people and all this Figma Make, so, oh, I can do Figma Make and I can put a design together in 3 minutes. It doesn't mean that you've done any of the things that the UX person would have done. So stay in your lane. As we said earlier, Figma is really wreaking havoc on the discipline today. They don't care because they're getting paid. So they don't care. They don't care where it goes. They don't care what happens. Matter of fact, if a whole lot of people who shouldn't have access and shouldn't be doing design get access, you know how much money they're going to make? You know how many millions of dollars, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars Figma is going to make when more people start getting their hands on that product? But do you know how much destruction is going to come? And nobody's looking at that except for the level-headed people, the UX folks, because we are always the voice of reason. People who go into Figma Make and boast about what they can do in 2 minutes, those people are not a voice of reason. Matter of fact, they are driven usually by bias. They are usually driven by giving heed to and just doing whatever the hippo says. They are slaves to hippo influence. And so you see where that goes? So the democratization of UX is dangerous. And the more a person thinks, I guess I'm saying way more I said I was going to say, but it is what it is. The more somebody gives in to democratization, that person is lower on the UX maturity scale, if you will. Just know and understand that today. How do you view UX advancement levels? How fast can a person advance in UX? You come in at entry level, then you go from entry level to or junior into just a base UX. Actually, that's the entry level is the base UX. Then you've got your mid-level UXer. Then you've got senior. And then you've got, depending upon the organization after that, you can have lead, you can have staff, you can have principal, you can have distinguished. There's a lot of different levels. And people are, if you think that a person can rise up those ranks, we're going to talk about that in more detail next week. But if you think that you can rise up those ranks faster than what some might have you to believe, that is indicative of a lower level of UX maturity. In going back to those earlier days I was talking about, back in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2010, you didn't see senior UXers. Nobody was giving the title out. And it wasn't just because they didn't want to pay them. It was because you had to earn it. See, there was a meritocracy in UX at one time where you had to be in UX for at least 15 years. I didn't know anybody who had the title, actually, of senior UXer. If you were in UX, you were in UX. That was it. And man, I didn't get the senior title. Wow, it was really a long time. I had the title lead before I had the title senior, and I had the title lead by the time I got that title. Trying to remember, I was in the discipline for close to 20 years before somebody gave me the title lead. Technically, 18 years to be more exact. I was in the discipline for 18 years before I got the title lead. And I wasn't really even paying attention to that title when I had it at the time. I wasn't hungry. Nobody was hungry for titles in 2013, 2014, 2015. Nobody was talking about that. It wasn't. And then when companies started to really had to give reasons people to stay or try to give reasons for people to come in, that's when titles started being just thrown out there. A title became a negotiation ploy about 2015, 2016. And I was a manager by 2015. And by that time, I'd been in the discipline for 20 years when I became a manager. So it's interesting how all that stuff plays out. But today, I've seen manager and director positions for people with 1 year of experience. That is an indication that there's a UX maturity problem. I've seen instances where people have the senior title after they've been in working in UX for a year. And people even tell stories about how the company offers them that senior title because they're trying to get them to stay. They don't want to get them to leave. They're trying to do it to combat attrition. But they're giving people a title that they have not earned and that they don't deserve. That's misrepresentative of what's going on in their company. And people don't realize that bubbles up to discipline-wide UX maturity. When titles are being flaunted about and given out without people meriting them, when the meritocracy has been destroyed, now you've got a problem, because now that detrimentally impacts UX maturity for the individual. It detrimentally impacts UX maturity for the team. It detrimentally impacts UX maturity for the discipline at large. Problem, folks. So, but how you view, and we're not talking about that. How do you view it? How do you view the ways that you can advance in UX maturity? Are you willing to, whether you have the title or not, whatever your title is, how do you view yourself today? And what does your skill set really, what is it really representative of? That's what we have to ask ourselves today. And how do you view it? Today, a person should have been working in UX for at least 7 years to have the title of senior, quite frankly, 7, 8 years, minimum. And some people, it varies, because some people work at a company for a long time, and their perspective of UX is only reflective of how UX works in that organization. I know somebody who worked for a Fortune 50 company for over 10 years. And okay, they're going to get your title. Okay, we get all of that and we accept that. And it is what it is. But then that person is going to be exposed to people, and they are and have been exposed to people around the world. And they are viewed a particular way because, number one, they work for a FANG company, big highfalutin company. They've been in UX for X amount of time. And people who are younger in the discipline, people who have lower UX maturity levels. You're starting to see how this thing works with UX maturity now, how complex it is, how many moving parts there are. Those people are very eager. They will just believe whatever that person says because they work at a FANG company, because they've been working in UX for 10 years. Literally, that person been in UX for 10 years. And everything they said about UX is only applicable to the company that they worked at. They never worked anywhere else. They don't know what it is, what it's like to work at other companies. They don't know the challenges that a lot of other people face. So you see why discipline-wide UX maturity and perceiving it is important? So, and things that person was saying, it just wasn't true across the board. They can share their perspective with you, but they cannot speak for the discipline at large, where some of us who've worked for 5, 10 other companies, we can, because we've been there, we've seen it, and talk to other people to get their perspectives so that I'm not coming to you based on what I know and see alone. Is based on a collective, and I have a pretty large collective. I mentor and teach all over the world. I speak all over the world, and I get perspectives. I get input from people all over the world, and then I can parrot it back to you. I can, not using the word parrot loosely, I can tell you, because we subject these things to scrutiny, we evaluate them, we find out what's realistic, we find out what's trustworthy, and we give it back to you so you can be your absolute best today. And yeah, the stuff I'm talking about is not going to go viral because it's too real, because people with low personal UX maturity don't want to hear pure UX. They don't want to hear about real UX talk, which is why I always have that hashtag out there. So, you know, it is what it is today. So at any rate, folks, that's it for today. That is the challenge. That is the UX maturity challenge. And so we're going to go ahead and begin wrapping up here. I hope you were strapped in for that. I apologize for none of it. This is where we need to be. It's where our minds need to be to excel at UX today. We'll present another aspect of harsh realities associated with UX next week. Folks, if you haven't already been out there, check out the new and improved worldous.com website. We had an absolute blast working on the site and making the improvements. Now you can search for things and find things quickly. You can play every episode right there on the site. You don't have to go anywhere else to get access to the podcast anymore. You can see it right there. You can access it right there. You can perform searches right there. And so nice and easy. There's a jumping off point. If you go to the resources tab there, you will see access to the YouTube channel. You'll see access to the Kaizen tees, merchandise, everything, the blog, all that information is available right here from the worldous.com website. So check it out today. We hope that you will go out there and you will get a lot out of what we've got to offer for you out there, and to make your experience with the podcast a lot more enjoyable, a lot easier, a lot more beneficial, a lot more supportive of you and yours and what you're doing in UX today. But folks, we're going to wrap up here, and we will have another chapter of this topic for you next week. Until then, this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, signing off, wishing everybody all the best. Happy UXing, everybody.